Hey everybody, what's happening? I'm Steven.
And I'm Spencer.
We work with Nexus Youth and Family Services here in Amador County, and we're continuing with our presentation from Stanford University and their Tobacco Prevention Toolkit. Today's topic is E-Cigarette and Pod-Based Systems 101, Big Tobacco Reinvented. Many of you have probably heard about e-cigarettes, specifically the pod-based e-cigarettes, like Juul, Puff Bar, Fix, Smoke, Enjoy, and a bunch of others out there. They have grown in tremendous popularity, and many users wrongly believe that these are harmless devices. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about why many health professionals are concerned about these new nicotine delivery systems.
So first off, let's start off by talking about what is an e-cigarette. An e-cigarette is made up of a battery, an atomizer with a heating coil, an absorbent material that absorbs a liquid that can contain nicotine, flavoring, and other chemicals. The battery allows the atomizer to heat the liquid, which is called e-juice, and creates an aerosol that is breathed into the lungs and breathed out into the air repeatedly. Some of these devices are preloaded with the e-juice, and some require the user to add it. Now, the original e-cigarettes and vape pens, they looked like a cigarette, they came preloaded, and they were disposable. Now, however, later devices looked more like pens or contained bigger, bulky battery boxes, which are known as mods.
And these pod-based e-cigarettes are a current type of e-cigarette. They are usually made up of two components. The part on the left is the power source and contains the battery, which can be charged through a USB port. The smaller piece on the right is the pod, or the cartridge. A cartridge from Juul is reported to produce about 200 puffs of aerosol and comes in a variety of different flavored e-juices, all with an alarming amount of nicotine. These flavors and colors are concerning since they attract young people. Each Juul pod is packed with 41.3 milligrams of nicotine, which is equivalent to the amount of nicotine the body can take in from smoking up to 1.5 to 2 packs of cigarettes. A fixed pod contains almost twice that, with 75 milligrams. This is concerning because we know the developing teen brain is extremely sensitive to nicotine and prone to addiction. A pod holds its e-juice in the outer shell. When plugged into the battery, into the battery piece, the e-juice is then heated up to produce an aerosol, which becomes invasive to the lungs.
So our biggest concern with the pod-based e-cigarettes amongst young people like yourselves is that they can deliver up to the same amount of nicotine released from 1.5 to 3.5 packs of cigarettes. Also, it's important to remember that all salt-based e-juices and liquids contain nicotine. So for example, Juul pods, Puff Bars, and Ecig, they all contain salt-based nicotine. Products with salt-based nicotine can allow for more frequent use, increasing their potential for addiction because it feels less harsh on the person's throat. Each Juul pod contains 41.3 milligrams of nicotine, which is extremely high compared to other tobacco and nicotine products. A Puff Bar holds even more at about 50 milligrams of nicotine, while an Ecig is loaded with even more at 68 milligrams. So if you aerosolize that same amount of e-juice, but with the most concentrated free-based nicotine, it would be equal to about 25 milligrams of nicotine.
The throat hit, or the irritation on the throat, is the body's way of saying, hey, the air doesn't feel normal on my throat. I shouldn't be breathing this in. See, cigarette users become tolerant of this feeling over time. They even associate it with receiving a hit of nicotine. Juul Labs, what they did is they claimed that they designed the Juul for adults who wanted to quit smoking. If that was the case, wouldn't they have designed this so the device would irritate their throat, since smokers associated it with that happening? And so let's just say that they were interested in attracting new non-smokers or consumers like you young people. They simply studied how cigarette companies spent decades manipulating nicotine to maintain addiction. Juul's nicotine salt formula mimics the nicotine salt additives developed by R.J. Reynolds, the creators of Newport and Camel. In other words, this reduced harshness on the throat has allowed Juul to deliver more nicotine to young people without their bodies rejecting it as easily. The flavors also make it seem friendly to young people and attractive, and the attractive design can make it seem non-threatening at all. For those who haven't inhaled an aerosol with nicotine salt, let's look at an analogy to wrap our heads around this. Let's say you picked up a soda that had way more sugar than you wanted. You would most likely be turned off by its extreme sweetness.
So for many young consumers, we're told that the clouds made by e-cigarettes and vape pens, they're just water vapor. That's what they told us when they originally started to come out. Do you guys think that's true? In the actual reality, the e-cigarettes and vape pens allow a user to make large clouds that many think are just water vapor. But in reality, the cloud is a mixture of many different chemicals that were either present in the e-liquid before or produced during the heating process. A vapor is a chemical that has evaporated. However, an aerosol is a mixture of liquid particles suspended in a gas and can contain many different chemicals. So instead of just mixing with the air like a pure gas would, aerosol leaves drops behind.
Here's a list, and this is not an exhaustive list, but here's a list of chemicals found in regular cigarettes. In class, we would have you turn to your neighbors and have you come up with a couple of chemicals on the list that you think are found in e-cigarette and pod-based systems.
So now we saw that whole big list there of a bunch of different chemicals, not an exhaustive list, but a bunch of different chemicals that are found in regular cigarettes. Let's take a look here and see how many of those chemicals are also found in e-cigarettes or pod-based aerosols. So as you can see, guys, it is almost all the same ones. It's important to understand too that the ones here that will be changing colors, those are ones that are known by the government, the FDA specifically, to be harmful or potentially harmful products. So, and while we did not know this at first, many of these are the same chemicals found in traditional cigarettes, like we said earlier. Simply put, e-cigarettes produce an aerosol that often contains many harmful chemicals and toxins, some which can cause cancer. Nicotine itself is a highly addictive compound, and while not all e-cigarettes contain nicotine, all have many of these chemicals and toxins in them.
So based on what we know about e-juice and e-liquids, what chemicals would you specifically find in these pods? Let's look at the ingredients that Juul Lab reports as being in a Juul pod. First is nicotine. Nicotine is the addictive component in all of the pods. Then there's benzoic acid. It pairs up with the nicotine to help deliver high amounts of nicotine to the brain. Glycerol and propylene glycol, they're common ingredients found in most e-juices. Propylene glycol is not approved by the government for inhaling. It is for food, but not for inhaling. The other chemicals include natural oils, extracts, and flavors. What do they mean exactly by extracts and flavors? What else truly is in this pod? Well, scientists started to look at the chemicals in the Juul pod e-juice, and guess what they found? They found these. They found 59 chemicals when they looked at all the pod flavors. Why wouldn't they want us to know this? Maybe this will help you answer the question. The names in red represent chemicals that are corrosive, irritants, harmful, toxic, and dangerous to the environment. What you see in orange are chemicals that are harmful to those in light blue, represent chemicals that are irritants. Recently, a Harvard University study found a toxin named glucan, which was found in Juul pods. Glucan is a component commonly found in the outer layer of the lungs. Glucan is known for causing inflammation of the airways in the lungs and can lead to long-term lung disease.
So secondhand aerosol, similar to secondhand smoke, which we've learned a lot more about nowadays, is the plume of smoke or chemicals released into the environment directly from the e-cigarette or pod-based device, and from the lungs of the user as well. Common places for exposure to secondhand aerosol would include restaurants, parks, vehicles, and designated smoking areas. Chemicals that were released include harmful substances such as nicotine, heavy metals, ultrafine particles that fall deep into the lungs, cancerous chemicals, and volatile organic chemicals or compounds, aka VOCs. Exposure can lead to cancer, respiratory infections, and make someone's asthma worse, among various other health problems.
Another way that the e-cigarette vape pens pose a danger to people other than the user is through third-hand aerosol. Third-hand aerosol is the mixture of chemicals in the e-cigarette vape pen aerosol that remain on the surfaces and in the dust, even after the aerosol is gone, and react with the other chemicals in the environment to form toxic chemicals. These potentially harmful chemicals can be exposed to other people or animals through the respiratory system, through ingestion, and through skin exposure. Small children are especially at risk for third-hand aerosol exposure because they tend to put things in their mouth and they have more vulnerable skin.
In the recent past, e-cigarette, e-liquid was federally unregulated and often mislabeled. When many of the e-juices were tested, some that claimed to have zero nicotine actually had nicotine in them, and the amount they said they had was not always true. So while we were starting to see quite a bit of local and school regulations, there are still zero guidelines for corporations that corporations must follow regarding their product. And since there are no federal regulations on these products, there are no child precautions on the caps, making them dangerous to other people besides the user.
Absolutely. And the two most common ways an e-cigarette industry represents the amount of nicotine in e-juice is in milligrams per milliliter or percentage of nicotine by weight. The labeling of nicotine content is inconsistent and sometimes represented in milligrams or milliliters, and sometimes they may not be labeled at all. From a show of hands, we would ask you to show us, raise your hands, and how many are you confused by this? And we would bet that the confusion is there. And we obviously don't want that, and they need accountability.
So if you don't know, a standard pack of cigarettes contains 20 cigarettes. There is 1 milligram of nicotine per cigarette, so about 20 milligrams of nicotine delivered to the body from a whole pack of cigarettes. Unlike other e-juices, which may or may not contain nicotine, all salt-based e-juices do contain nicotine. And according to Juul Labs, 1 Juul pod contains 41.3 milligrams of nicotine. This is equal to the amount of nicotine you'll find in about 40 cigarettes. So, again, that's about equal to about 2 packs of cigarettes. And as mentioned before, this is a high amount of nicotine and can be intense for first-time users. Our concern is that young people are being introduced to high amounts of nicotine and developing a tolerance quickly, which is making them become addicted as a result. 1 puff bar contains about 50 milligrams of nicotine, which is the equivalent to 50 cigarettes. So, how many packs of cigarettes would a puff bar then be equal to? About 2.5 or so. 1 Soron Vagon cartridge contains up to 90 milligrams of nicotine or 90 cigarettes. So that would be the equivalent of about 4.5 packs. No matter what pod device you are using, all of them contain high levels of nicotine, which is extremely addictive, and it keeps you coming back.
So when those receptors get filled, it sets off a chain reaction that leads the brain to feel pleasure. Why do you think our brains have evolved to feel pleasure? Pleasure is necessary for survival because it encourages us to do activities that keep us alive, like eating, sleeping, and even building relationships. However, no matter what kind of device it comes from, nicotine hijacks the pleasure pathway and tricks our brain into interpreting the chemical signal as pleasurable and necessary for survival. Continuing to use nicotine in any form will result in addiction. This means that nicotine turns your brain against you, so you feel forced to keep using nicotine just to feel normal. One way to think about nicotine is like termites coming into your home. Your home is a structure that is already built and functions as a shelter for you to live in. Termites then come in and they take advantage of this structure, turning the protective shelter into food for their colony. Keep in mind, this effect is no accident. Companies specifically design their products to deliver high levels of nicotine to their users, just like the big tobacco companies in their cigarettes. Why do you think addiction is such a great, big, powerful model for these companies?
So nicotine doesn't just have an effect on your brain, since there are acetylcholine receptors all over your body. So for example, using nicotine can make your heartbeat faster because it activates your fight or flight response. Nicotine salt e-liquids produce a faster heart rate than other non-nicotine salt e-liquids. Outside of all the chemicals and toxins already in pod-based e-cigarettes, nicotine can independently cause trouble breathing and damage to your lungs. Nicotine can also increase acid reflux. And last but not least, nicotine can negatively impact your reproductive organs.
So that kind of concludes our first video of this. We're going to do a 2-part series on this one topic because of the amount of information that's there. We believe that this information is extremely valuable, and it's always kind of changing because of the information that we're getting. We do know that it does have a great effect on our body, and we do know that it's illegal for anybody under the age to use it, and we would not condone that. So Spencer or myself, if you have any questions and you want to talk to us about something, give us a call. Our telephone number is 209-257-1980. Listen for one of our extensions.
Yep, and as always guys, stay healthy and stay safe.